indeed for making this early event here at the ThinkTent. We tell who the most committed of you are for probably either nursing hangovers or not having hangovers to come and discuss this very important question about why does council tax only seem to go up. I want to start by telling a little story, which was during lockdown. I had a call from our political director, James Roberts, who some of you may know. He's conspicuously absent today, I note. And he rang me. It was about midday. We were all working from home. I thought, I better get out of bed now. I didn't get out of bed. And he said, Harry, I've got an idea. You know a lot about local government finance. Perhaps I was thinking we could get you writing a column for Conservative Home about, what's going on in local government, wasteful spending, that sort of thing. And I thought, I thought, what am I going to write about? And as soon as I said that question to myself, I realised what a stupid question it was, because there is no shortage of material to write about what is going on in local government financing, and we are inundated with wasteful examples of spending. And my colleague Sarah Rainwater is constantly pestering me with emails that come into our info account, and then having to chase me when I haven't responded to them because there are so many. And I'm still working through a backlog of them, because this is such a big issue now, especially with council tax we're now hearing could go up by 5, 6, even 7% to pay for social care, after that was supposedly what the national insurance rise was meant to do, but seemingly that's not going to happen. In England now, the average council tax bill is nearly £1,900 for a Band D property. That's 111% cash terms increase since 2001. And it's no wonder that many households are struggling to pay their bills, and this is a major financial burden for them. I was doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations the other day. Some of you may know that Nottingham City Council has the highest Band D bill at, I believe, £2,226. We are not that many years away, probably 5, 6, 7 years away from that bill being £3,000 for a Band D property, unless they get their act together. And I'm sure many people here will be aware of the problems at a council like Nottingham. Why does it keep going up? Is it a problem of central government funding cuts? Is it something wider with the system as a whole, the way we can collect council tax? We haven't had a council tax re-evaluation on properties in England since I think about 1993. It's not really based on your ability to pay as an individual. A lot of people get quite upset. If you're a single person, you get a 25% discount, even though perhaps if you had two people, maybe you should have a 50% discount because there's 50% fewer people. Or is it, as I would probably argue, wasteful spending? But anyway, that's why we have our excellent panellists here today who are going to discuss this. So from left to right, we have Councillor Charles Fifield, who is from Cheshire West and Chester Council. He's going to talk to us about what's going on there. And he's also, we've got these rather magnificent bags that he sponsored from the conference 2 years ago now. So pick one of those up over there, and there's a fantastic quote by Mrs. Thatcher on the back, on the other side as well. So do make sure you grab one of those. To my immediate left, I have Councillor Marion Jenkins, who is the Shadow Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources at Birmingham City Council. To my right, Councillor Joanne Laban, who is the Opposition Leader at Enfield Council. And to her right, Darwin Friend, who is a Policy Analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance. So panellists are going to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then we want to throw it open to you, the audience. We want to hear from you. I want more wasteful spending examples and what's going on in your local councils. So I've got plenty to write about in Conservative Home, and keep that going. And it's also an opportunity just, if there is something major going on, talk to us. Taxpayers Alliance would love to come and do some campaigning in your area. So put your thinking caps on while people are speaking, and then we'll throw you to the audience in about 25 minutes or so. Charles, may I start with you, please?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Councillor Charles Fifield. I'm Borough Councillor in Cheshire West and Chester Council. I've been there, councillor there for about 10 years. Now, in relation to the question, why does council tax ever only seem to go up? Well, actually, it doesn't always, because in those 10 years, it's gone up 7 times, it's been frozen twice, and it's been cut once. Now, I was part of the ruling administration when we froze it twice, we cut it slightly once, and we put it up once. And so it can not go up. The sad thing about that was, after all that hard work, we were then turfed out of office. Labour came in and no prizes for guessing what they've done 6 years in a row. In the last 6 years, it's gone up by 30%. So sadly, yes, council tax does most recently seem to always go up. But that's, I think part of it is down to the fact you've got to go and look at the overall status of the finances. Cheshire West and Chester has got a population of just over 1/3 people. This current year's budget is £830 million, of which about £500 million is going towards adult social care, children and families. The council tax itself raises just over £200 million, and that is our primary source of income, effectively, that we as a council can control. And those are basically the numbers which we're dealing with. I think there are opportunities to look at that, and that certainly policy decisions make an impact in relation to how much money you're spending and what the council tax is on. I got a briefing note from our council, and it's quite interesting to spot the difference, because I spoke on a panel 2 years ago when, I say, we sponsored those, and when I got the numbers back, it's quite interesting to see what's changed in relation to it. That, as I say, the council has continued to save money. The savings have risen from 198 million to 227 million since we were created in 2009. But of that, money has been reinvested, which is a very interesting word, and hopefully one that we can explore further in the panel as to precisely what reinvestment means. But 2 years ago, we'd reinvested 81 million. 2 years later, we've reinvested 130 million. So there's £50 million worth of additional reinvestment over the last 2 years. And what is that money being spent on? Well, that's effectively policy decisions that are going on there. So I think council tax, certainly when there's policy decisions like that going on, can only ever go up. And I think if you want to change that mindset, certainly I think you've got to change the party that's in control of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Joanne, may we come to you, please?
Well, Enfield is an outer London borough, and if the government gave us more money, like in any organisation, we would be, whether it be Labour or Conservative, I think we'd all be grateful for money from central government. But in my opinion, some of the formulas that determine the amount of money that goes to boroughs like mine is woefully out of date and doesn't reflect the pressures we're in. Benefit reform was good, and Ian Duncan-Smith should be heralded for that. But what that meant was a lot of inner London troubles have gone out to outer London, and places like Enfield now have the pressures of demographic change. We have a very young population and a very old population, and they require services, and the money we get does not reflect what we have to do anymore. So I do think that there is a case for all councils for the fairer funding review to happen, so we are funded in a way that reflects what we have to deliver to our residents. Does it have to go up? No. I think it's gone up every year under Labour, and I would say that as the leader of the opposition, but it has. There is waste in the public sector. If anyone comes along and says no, they've got a very different experience to me. I have worked at the GLA, so I've seen money being used for bicycle ballet by the Mayor of London in Enfield. We gave money to keep an organisation, a business in Enfield. You may think that is good news for jobs, but it's been taken over by Microsoft. So in effect, the Enfield taxpayer has subsidised a new building for one of the most profitable companies in the world. So when I drive past there, I do feel physically sick when I see that. We also have the problem with borrowing. Councils are encouraged to borrow, but that's great for capital projects, but to pay the interest, it gets go on the revenue budget, and that cuts money from the day-to-day services that residents rely on. Your bins are being removed with money from the revenue budget. So if you've something like Enfield Council who is £1.1 billion in debt pre-COVID. This is tens of millions of pounds that are not going to social services, your bins, your parks, your grass verges. All of that comes from the revenue budget, and the more you borrow, the more money is taken away from the stuff that our residents write to us about. Because at the end of the day, that's what they care about. If you mess with bins, you do it at your peril. It's what everybody loves because everyone gets it. If you don't have a child, you don't have the experience of the schools. If you're just, your only experience of a council is your bin and your council tax, you're not getting that service. It's a real impact on the entire borough. So if there's anyone here who hasn't touched bins, really do not do that. I've campaigned heavily on it over the years and it's never let me down. But in the same sense, we have just done up our civic centre. There is no one currently working at our civic centre. We have a very skeleton crew there, post-COVID, but it's being done up. We have new furniture, colourful furniture. We've got huddles. We've got a coffee cart now. I walk around there and there is hardly anyone in the building. And I was told the other day, oh, we're going to knock through the wall, councillor. I said, oh, it's very good. Why? And he went, oh, just down there. I said, but we've just done that up for the coffee cart. And he went, yes, we may have done that, but we wish to do more now. And I'm thinking, how much more can you waste? Now, the leader of my council was on TV during COVID, and you'd think we were really, really, really hard up. And then suddenly we had colourful pedestrian crossings. And I'm saying, well, not quite. I think people could have done with the black and white crossing. It wasn't an essential spend. And he went, oh, but people like it, councillor. And I go, really? I mean, we have directors and we have a chief executive, and it's always in the news, and Taxpayers Alliance always do the rich list. Last year they got a 2.75% pay rise. Even the chief executive got a 2.75% pay rise. In Enfield, they get over 200 grand a year, gets more than the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister can launch Trident. Enfield Council's chief executive runs the bins. It's not quite, he'd kill me for that if he was here, but nevertheless, it's not comparable. But their money is, and it really needs to be looked at from a delivery point of view, because these folk just go from one council to the other. So if they went from Enfield, they'd pop up in Lambeth. It's a complete cycle of councils, and I just think it really needs to be looked at in terms of whether our salaries for the top teams are actually delivering for our residents. So we're 1.1 billion in debt. There's nothing really to show for it. We have a district energy system that's failed to make a profit so far. We're giving people monopolies on heat and power. We've had schemes that have gone forever for regeneration and not brought a bean in. So there is scope for council tax to go down, but I think it's not a simple issue. When you've got adult social care, children's services, it's very hard to work out the demand, and you've got out-of-date formulas. But I won't let Taxpayers Alliance down. It can go down. You have to manage your money properly, but you've got to look at a wider set of issues when we look at this.
Thank you, Joanne. And I'd very much just echo what you're saying now about the coffee cart thing, because I've written a lot about Slough Council recently, who I'm sure many of you know fell for bankruptcy. And they too built these shiny new office blocks, £40 million, bean bags, AstroTurf. And as you say, this is all money that's not going into the key frontline statutory services that they should be providing. Marion, over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the question is, why does council tax keep increasing? Well, of course, actually, we could pose the same question about taxation in general, now that we have the highest taxes in 70 years in the UK. But let's focus on council tax and look specifically at one council for an explanation as to why council tax keeps increasing. Now, I don't know if there's anyone in the room that likes horror stories. If there is, you'll probably enjoy my speech. The rest of you will not enjoy what I'm about to say. If there was ever a taxpayer horror story, I'm afraid it's Labour-controlled Birmingham City Council. Now, about 80% of our funding in Birmingham comes from central government, and we raise about 20% from local sources such as council tax, fines, business rates, etc. And of the 20% that comes locally, it's mostly council tax. But of course, only a small proportion of voters actually pay council tax. Even in a household with 5 or 6 voters, it's probably only the head of the household that writes a cheque for the council tax, and many households don't pay it at all. And therefore, there's very limited linkage between the payment of the council tax and the general body of voters that decide who runs the council. Now I think if every time Labour Birmingham wasted £1 million, which is quite often, we went round every doorstep in Birmingham, rung the bell, and whichever voter came to the door, we said, we've come to collect £50 off you tonight, mate, right? Because we've got to cover this £1 million. I suspect there would be a sea change in terms of how people vote. So, I think, Mr. Chairman, the high-level answer to stopping the relentless rise in council tax is to untangle our hopelessly centralised system of government in the UK, to make councils stand on their own 2 feet financially and raise the money that they spend locally. And this would create an ownership of the council between the voters and the budget that it spends. Now, here's a difficult question for you. Should we remove the 2% cap on council tax increases? Well, you know, of course, as Tories, instinctively, we think the 2% cap on council tax is a good idea. It stops Labour councils running amok and increasing council tax to any level that they like. But there is a feeling within the Birmingham Conservative group that it's actually preventing Labour doing as much damage as they really ought to be seen to be doing. The sort of, you know, generally speaking, whenever Labour overspend in Birmingham, one way or another, it ends up getting covered by central government funds, either now or in the future. And you can never imagine a situation where the government is going to allow Birmingham City Council to go bust, close the doors and stop functioning. And consequently, it's arguable that Labour should be allowed to raise council tax to the level it needs to be to actually fund what they're doing, and then let the voters take responsibility for the council that they elect. And in those circumstances, I suspect that we would very quickly get a Conservative administration. It's worth noting also that Birmingham City Council always takes the 2% maximum increase in the social care precept, but in the last 2 years has underspent on social care by 9 and 12 million. And of course, these underspends are going to fund the general council account. Now, I know you'll say, oh, well, it's supposed to be ring-fenced and you can't move the money across. But of course, in practice, because they're getting extra funding from the taxpayers to pay the social care precept, it's money that they then don't have to move from the general fund. So essentially, it is getting moved into the general fund. And therefore, it's clear that this type of ring-fencing doesn't work. Now, let me give you a few examples from Labour Birmingham City Council, which I can tell you is a king amongst men when it comes to wasting taxpayers' money. Knowing that I was coming here today, I set about preparing a list of the worst Labour cock-ups in the last 10 years, and I can tell you that was a pretty competitive list. I mean, let's start with a small example by Birmingham standards of the bus depot for the Athletes' Village for the Commonwealth Games. You may know that we're going to be holding the Commonwealth Games next year. Now, this Athletes' Village that they're building will never house an athlete because it's going to be delivered late and it'll be too late for the Commonwealth Games. And we're now going back to using university accommodation, which is what the Conservative group said to use in the first place. But anyway, to build this Athletes' Village, they needed to relocate a bus depot, which had a budget of £2 million. Now, you might think moving a bus depot at £2 million sounds expensive anyway. But right up at Christmas, a couple of years ago, Labour pushed through a decision to change through the budget. This was done with a day's notice. It was done as a special decision, so there was no ability for us to call it in. There was no cabinet meeting to discuss it. And the budget for moving that bus centre has now gone up by a factor of 8, and it's cost £15.5 million to move this bus station, right, to service an athletes' village that will never actually house any athletes. And senior officer payoffs is a real scandal at Birmingham. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, but at Birmingham, since 2012, we've had 9 chief executives, 5 finance directors, and 6 chairs of audit. And the current chair of audit is the Labour chief whip. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had shares in a business that had gone through 9 CEOs and 5 finance directors in the last 10 years, I'd be thinking about selling my shares in that business at the moment. And it's a matter of public record that one of the CEOs who left after just 3 years in office, got a payoff in excess of £500,000, and that even excludes the 200 grand he got in the last year in which he was working. And it's not the only one. I mean, we've had payoffs 211,000, 402,000, 250,000, 392,000. In most cases, these are payments for failure. Now, you may be aware that government guidance says that payoffs in excess of 100 grand should be approved by full council. But it's only government guidance, and not one of those payoffs has come to full council in Birmingham. So I think one of the things the government should do is make that guidance mandatory. If you want to pay anybody off more than 100,000, it must go to the representative of the people in the form of the full council. So to wrap up, notwithstanding anything I've said so far, after a fairly long career in the private sector and 10 years in the public sector and Birmingham City Council in particular, I've come to the view that the public sector is just incapable of procuring efficiently or delivering value for money. Right. I'm afraid, thank you, I'm afraid the DNA of the state and those key parts of the helix that embed value for money into business people just isn't there in the public sector. So therefore, if we want to keep council tax where it is, let alone stop increasing it, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, the only answer is to reduce the size of the state and reduce the size of councils in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. And I'll just echo the point you made there about the payoffs. This is something the Taxpayers Alliance has been sort of leading the way on, these golden sector goodbyes. And as some of you may know, there was a cap briefly introduced, and then all the lobbyists managed to get it overturned again. But do go to the Taxpayers Alliance website and sign the petition on that, because we need to get that reinstated as soon as possible for exactly the reasons that Marion stated. Darwin, if I may turn to you now, please.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you all for coming along at this time of the morning. I appreciate it's still very, very early for most of us. Now, I'm going to start by saying it's not entirely council's fault. I mean, since 2010, the central government funding for councils have gone down. But having said that, council tax has more than doubled in the last 20 years, and at the Taxpayers Alliance, we find waste every day, and it does seem to be an endless trail from millions that they spend on award ceremonies for themselves, millions on flights, and then there's of course our town hall rich list, which every year seems to be going up with the thousands of staff earning six-figure salaries, many of whom are actually earning more than the Prime Minister himself. Now, to be fair to councils as well, some of them have actually recognised that ever-increasing rises to council tax is an issue, and shock horror, their residents aren't going to be entirely happy seeing it going up every year. And so what a lot of them have actually turned to, by the seams of it, is commercial property, commercial investments to increase the revenues that they can raise. Now, recently we did an investigation which was released with the Times on this, and it revealed £6.4 billion worth of commercial property is owned by councils. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a bad idea. It can be a good way to raise revenue, but the issue is that it isn't foolproof, and that when we look at actual specific councils, Harry earlier mentioned Nottingham with Robin Hood Energy, there's Croydon with Brick by Brick. And when we actually looked at the council's breakdown by council, then we actually saw that either the forecast yield and actual yield, so what they were predicting and what actually happened, was a lot further below what they forecasted, or more concerning for me, was that a significant number of councils weren't even forecasting anything at all. So the question then has to be asked of, if you don't know what it's meant to be yielding, how can you possibly budget or finance anything at all? And so I do think if the projects pay off, then I think fair enough, good enough for them, but fundamentally it's us in the crowd, well, all of you in the crowd, and taxpayers across the country who are going to be on the hook if it goes wrong. You are the final guarantor for the council's mistakes, and so if their gamble goes wrong, then essentially they're going to have to ask for even more in taxes than they were in the first place, which kind of leads me on to my next point, which is the fact of when we actually look at the councils that were investing and were succeeding, they were doing a good job. There was a lot that had business units, for example, whereby they were making positive yields. But when we looked at those councils, it didn't seem to be that they were either cutting or freezing council tax in return, which then begs the question again of, if you're going to increase council tax anyway, what is the purpose in investing in commercial property? You might as well save the risk and just increase council tax if that's what you're going to be doing anyway. But I do think fundamentally that there are a lot of ways. I'm going to follow on from Marion in picking out some good wasteful spending examples, and then some efficiencies that can be made as well, because there's plenty going around. I mean, Milton Keynes Council spent a huge amount to put moss in the wall of their buildings, I believe. There was at Shropshire Council, there was a pothole expert who they deemed worthy of £160,000 a year. Now that's more than the Prime Minister, as Joanne was mentioning earlier. But to be a little bit more productive, some efficiencies that can be made within councils. They could stop first-class travel. I don't see why, if you need to travel somewhere, you have to be in first class. Just go economy like the rest of us have to. If you're going to a meeting, why do we have to travel anymore? I think one of the big lessons we've all learnt from COVID is that we can do video conferencing. You don't need to be in person necessarily to do meetings anymore. Printing costs. Again, technology has advanced. We've got computers now, we've got phones, we've got tablets. I think everyone, well, I hope everyone in this room owns at least one of those things. We don't need to be printing everything anymore. It can be viewed electronically. But I think most importantly of all for me personally is shared services. We're seeing some councils do this now, and they're actually seeing good success. There's some where I'm from in Norfolk, there's 3 councils that have come together. They're going to actually be doing a shared service for bin collections, and so they're predicting in the long run for that, there's going to be significant cost savings as a result. And I think if we think about this generally, if you've got 2 councils and they're paying £100,000 each to their chief executive, for example, wouldn't it make more sense to work together, get rid of one of those people and pay them £120,000, cutting the costs for each council by £40,000 each? And so to sum up, I think given the waste that we reveal and the efficiencies that we recommend councils can be made, I think that needs to be the first step councils make before making any more tax rises. And I think the way they could do that is through a thorough investigation themselves and go on a war on waste into their own councils.
Thank you, Darwin. Just before I throw it open to the audience, I'm going to slightly abuse my position as chair and just ask some questions of my own, if I may. Joanne, you mentioned the debt at Enfield is £1.1 billion. Is that right?
Yes, it's just over £1 billion, yeah.
So is this the next sort of ticking time bomb in councils? Because one of the things I've been looking at is, and the audience may have heard of these, they're called LOBO loans, lender option, borrower option loans, where basically banks about 10, 15 years ago were selling loans to councils at a better interest rate than they can get from the Public Works Loan Board. But at any point, the bank can say, we're going to hike the rate, and if you don't want to pay it, you've got to pay us the money back. And basically, unless you were a very experienced financial person, you should not have been taking out these loans. I don't know if Enfield has LOBO loans, but with the sort of threat of inflation now and interest rates might go up and trying to service that debt, could it become insurmountable? And I'd also throw it open to the other panellists as well.
Well, funnily enough, a couple of last Wednesday, but the Wednesday before, we have full council and we had the annual Treasury Management Report. For those of you who are in local government, it is the document that sets out your loans and debts. And worrying for me is that we have a capital programme that will require in the next 10 years to have a debt of £2 billion. And that's fine, but if interest rates change, that puts Enfield in a precarious position. It is good in the sense that they have some loans that are fixed rate, so they've covered themselves with some of them. But at the end of the day, we'll be spending a substantial amount on interest, which is nothing, that the public do not see, but they do see it by a reduction in services that they rely on. And so it is a ticking time bomb. Clearly, you can imagine, I have Labour councillors saying to me, but the government's borrowing. And I said, yes, but you managed to get yourself £1 billion in debt pre-COVID. And we have had the worst pandemic in a century. The government has had to respond to that, but we were in that level of debt. And for me personally, I don't see anything as a taxpayer in Enfield for that debt. We have an energy company called Energetic, in a similar way to Robin Hood, hopefully a bit more profitable, but it has yet to make a profit. It's at the moment, and so we've got that going on. We've had companies that have had to be brought back in-house. it is a ticking time bomb. We're encouraged to borrow, but some councils like to borrow more than others, and if interest rates go up, we're going to see more councils going under. And Croydon will not be the only example across the country. It is something that interest rates go up, local government is in a bad position. That's all so I can say. It's a bit doom and gloom.
I was just going to add, bearing in mind there's a big difference between the UK government borrowing because it controls its own currency.
Yeah.
Essentially, it can create money, which councils can't do. You know, when councils borrow, they do create real debt. At Birmingham City Council, one of the largest liabilities is the pension scheme, which is colossal. Right? And I don't know how you get it down. I suppose if you're in a hole, stop digging would be a good starting point. But it's an incredibly difficult challenge. Okay.
Right, I'll throw it open to the audience. I actually have got a question for the audience, which is on the energy company things. Can anyone think of a single council energy company that's council-owned that's made a profit? I don't know of one, so have a think about that. Gentlemen at the back there, you look very desperate to ask a question. Just wait for the microphone.
See the enthusiasm.
Yeah, I'll answer your first one, actually, because I sit on the board of West Mercia Energy as part of Worcestershire County Council, and I think we do supply Birmingham City Council's energy, actually, as well. But no, it does make a profit. Not a very big one, I have to say,
Okay.
but it's not anything like Robin Hood or whatever else. It doesn't do any consumer loans or whatever else. So there you go. There's the answer. But with Robin Hood and whatever, that was my fear when I went to council, and I scrutinised it to have a look at it, and I've now ended up on the board, which is a bit depressing. Darwin makes a great point, I think, really, because what I found going from the private sector into the public sector is just shell-shocked and gobsmacked me at every level, really, in terms of the way decisions are made and the quality of the people that are making those decisions. And I think what you're talking about is speculation by people that have got no idea how to speculate. And the note I've put down here is suppliers rub their hands with glee when the council approaches them. You know, because the normal procedures go out the window, the extra zeros come on, and away we go. And I think one of the things that you've touched on there, really, with shared services, I'm also deputy leader at Bromsgrove, which has shared service between Bromsgrove and Redditch, but it's not that nirvana that you might think of, actually. It's now, if I wanted to change an officer, I've got to get the other council's permission to do it as well. So it does bring in its own complexities, and I'd much rather see a unitary approach where we've got it. And as part of that unitary, I find it absolutely astounding that each of these councils goes off and develops their own IT systems to do exactly the same that's done UK-wide, and the Treasury hasn't got a grasp of what's happening in any of those councils. So the first thing I've done, and I collared Michael Gove on this before he even got this job, we must have centralised systems that feed the data straight into the Treasury so you can see early on where these things are going wrong. And as to borrowing, Joanne's made me at Worcester feel a lot happier now, but I cannot understand how councils have ever borrowed, why they've ever borrowed a penny.
Very good. And this lady here. Oh, sorry. Just wait for the microphone. Sorry, I know, just for the benefit of everyone and people watching at home. Sorry, thanks.
Velma Mattett from Sutton Coldfield, so I also pay my council tax to Birmingham City Council. But listening to everybody on the panel today, there's clearly a lot of manoeuvre to reduce waste. So my proposal for next year would be that there should be a cap on no increase in council tax and for next year, and perhaps even a target by Boris to say reduce by 5%. And then the councils will need to find a way of dealing with the reduction through the shared services, which I'm a strong advocate of because I'm a finance person myself, through reduction of waste. The other major increase I see on my council tax bill is the police and crime commissioners. Since in Theresa May's time, these new police and crime commissioners were appointed. Personally, I'm against them. 9.1% on my council tax this year has gone to that budget. And I can't see any benefit of having them compared to when the police were governing themselves. So I think there's also needs to be a cap or a reduction in all these added layers. And then finally, I'm not a fan of increased devolution because it will only add more cost layers locally. So I would also not endorse further devolution. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. Just Yeah, well, absolutely. Just on the Marion, you were talking about removing the cap on Birmingham essentially in council so that they could, show you people would see just how much they want to rise council tax by. Now, of course, if the cap weren't removed, they could go to a referendum to say, like Surrey tried to do many years ago. Some of you may recall. But presumably they don't want to do that because they know they're going to lose, I guess.
Yeah. That's right. You can go above 2% with a local referendum, but that doesn't happen, partly because the referendum is expensive anyway to conduct, but partly because they know they would lose it. So they do stay to the maximum 2% every time. It's meant to be a maximum, not an automatic increase, although it's become an automatic increase virtually in Birmingham. But we just kind of think that if Labour was allowed to increase the council tax to the extent that it would really like to, over a number of years, the impact of that would be such that the chance of electing a Conservative council in Birmingham, which we may get in May, would be substantially increased. I put it to you as a theoretical question rather than a statement of policy.
If it were, you said you can't raise it at all, do you think it would force a hand? They wouldn't be relocating the bus station, the bus depot, they wouldn't be doing silly things. Do you think it would focus the minds a bit more? No.
They're detached. The relocation of the bus depot was connected with the Commonwealth Games, most of which is being paid for by the government. It's being funded about 3/4 by the UK government and about 1/4 by Labour Birmingham. But certain parts of it are wholly the responsibility of the council, which includes the Athletes' Village, which is being built as part of a complex finance scheme with the council lending money to itself and renting it back again. And, if you've got time, I'll try and remember how they worked it all out. The leader couldn't remember how they'd done it. But if you were interested, I could tell you. But it's the sort of thing that councils really shouldn't be doing. But no, Harry, I don't think, given that 80% of their funding is coming from central government anyway, council tax represents a fairly small part of their thinking in terms of the funding of the council.
Charles, I believe you had some.
I was just going to pick up on what the gentleman said at the back, that potentially, yes, in relation to councils and their budget, is perhaps it could be something for the Office for Budget Responsibility could expand its remit into looking to what councils do, so go and help pull out the waste in relation to it. In relation to the lady's comment about a cap at 0% to stop it, effectively council tax going up, I couldn't agree with that, because there will be circumstances where you have no other choice. But I'm tempted to go along with what Marion's suggestion is, that as a Conservative I believe in freedom of choice, so why don't we give them the choice to whack the council up, but the council tax up, because if they do that, their true colours will come out. However, I am minded to go back to when I was first elected, that the government then brought in a scheme which effectively said that if you froze your council tax, you'd be given the equivalent of a 1% increase. Now that, funnily enough, was a policy that the SNP used really well in Scotland and that we copied here. And I would kind of like to go and see a return to that, so that there is an incentive in relation to trying to freeze the council tax, but you do have that slight margin, shall we call it, for error. Because the other thing I think that councils should always be aware of, and I'll caveat by saying I'm a member of the planning committee and I treat all planning applications with an open mind, but if councils build more houses, they get more council tax. Our council tax receipts go up by £2 million each year simply by the fact we've got new houses coming on. We get about £14–15 million more in council tax each year because of all the houses that have been built since 2009. So in some responses, council tax, yes, it always goes up, but unless you're actually net demolishing houses, your council tax receipts will always be going up. And in relation to the PCC, I entirely agree with you. We were fortunate that we were able to go and take the PCC back from Labour, so we got that one in Cheshire, which we're delighted about, because again, the examples of waste that are going on under Labour are extraordinary, and it's a good example of Conservative policies are financially sound. Thank you.
Let's have another question. Let's go to the gentleman there at the back.
Thank you very much. I've heard the words shared service mentioned quite a lot during this session, and as a former employee of a shared service, I can completely concur that they can deliver huge savings and huge efficiencies. But I would urge caution massively on shared services, because with the formation of a joint board, you're essentially creating a small limited company that operates using taxpayers' money without the transparency that a council would, with its own CEO, its own finance director, its own senior officers. And where two councils form a joint board and create a shared service, if you're not careful, what you'll find is that instead of having two organisations that need to watch their spending, what you end up with is three organisations that need to watch their spending, and one of them is far removed from the influence of the taxpayers themselves.
I believe there was a gentleman here, just in the front row, or second row even. We'll try and get you all in.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Edward Smith from Enfield. I would like to just observe that the heretical thoughts from Councillor Jenkins are something I support completely. The problem with local government and waste, quite simply, is that the accountability link has been broken over many years, and for perhaps good reasons, through the Labour Party primarily. But there is no longer any accountability, and that is why there is such enormous waste, and why there is a different approach in the private sector. For the simple reason they have to make money, they have to survive. That incentive doesn't apply to local government at all, and being kicked out, which is the alternative, doesn't work either. So that's just a support for the government actually looking at that, but I don't hold up much hope, I'm afraid. The more real question, of course, is about the approach we take locally with increases in council tax, because the problem we face, in the past it was very simple. You know, Conservative councils would say, well, if you vote us in, your council tax will not go up or it will be less. And that was, that was a very effective sort of policy. That no longer works because, quite simply, a lot of council tax rises are based on increasing demand. The number of elderly people with Alzheimer's and dementia that had to be looked after the council is growing all the time. The number of children with special needs is rising inexorably, and this all costs a fortune. And what Labour says, they say, you hard-hearted bastards, you want to deprive all these poor victims, which they are victims, of council support. And there is no answer to that, because that is, in a sense, true. Somehow, and this is a question to the panel, how can we differentiate these rises between those sorts of rises, which are unavoidable, unfortunately, and all the other wasteful activity that is completely avoidable and leads to increases in council tax? So that's a question for the panel.
Anybody like to take that one on?
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Well, Ed was a member of my team, and it's a stressful discussion in the pub many an hour after a council meeting. I think it's hard. We can do something about the waste, and it's endemic across local government, so that's it. But it's very, very hard, and I'm not sure what the answer is in terms of managing demand for adult social care and children. We have a 30% increase in children requiring SEN transport to dedicated schools, and that's within the year that you have to find the budget for. So it isn't, even though I'm saying it's an opposition leader, it is very difficult to manage that, because not only do you know the people coming through the system, you don't know who moves in, and that can make or break an entire budget. When it comes to SEN transport, it increases year on, and it's very difficult, and I really do not know the answer, because it is right and proper we look after the children. It is what councils do. We are here to help and provide services to our most vulnerable, but we do need help with how we manage the demand both for adults and children's, and sometimes children's gets left off the main message in articles, but really that is just as big as a problem as adult social care.
I think Charles, Marion and Darwin have all got points to make. So because we've got lots of questions, can I ask you just briefly, quick sort of 2-sentence answer if possible? Charles, if I can.
Yeah, I think the best way to counter it is with information. Is when you're doing your leaflets, when you're doing your campaigns on Facebook, point out what the waste that is going on in very graphic terms, as Marion has gone and pointed out. And if you get the opportunity, like for example, we happen at the moment where the council has decided to go and put a charge on the green waste collection, jump at it with both hands, because they are making a real big error there. That it's a £40 charge in the overall scheme of things. It's not a huge amount, but I have never seen people so angry, our local residents, about it. So when something like that happens, you've got to jump on it, and you've got to make sure that you can spell it out to people. This is the amount of money that's being spent on all of this. This is what we need to go and change.
Very quickly, to address your question specifically, the problem is the state's trying to do too much. Government can't do everything, councils can't do everything. What we should have are councils that focus on providing the core services well and restrict their activity to that. That's the short answer.
Jake, okay, I have a question for you, and then we'll come to this gentleman in the front here.
Just to follow up on that point, actually, Slough, obviously, since they went bust, they've had to do the bare minimum. And I think it was said earlier about people only really notice their bins. So have people in Slough noticed? I mean, what can we learn from that? Are we, have they? Yeah, what can we learn from it? Is basically the question.
Well, don't spend £40 million on an office block full of bean bags and AstroTurf. Similarly, Darwin mentioned Milton Keynes with the moss on the walls. It's my home council, and I've seen them waste millions. This is it. This is what I try and make clear in the column, though, right? That all this money that gets wasted on this nonsense is all money that can't go into looking after disadvantaged children and people with social care needs. And it's as you say, you might not cover all the costs, but you can certainly make some serious headway into it by focusing on the key things. I'll just very quickly say, if you're ever bored for something to do, go and look through the government contract finder system. Just put the word council in. There's no shortage of things there. Anyway, this gentleman here, I think had a question as well. We'll try and get as many in as we can in the remaining 10 minutes or so.
Jeremy Stephen. I'm from Farnham, down in Surrey-Hants border. I mean, we've got 3 councils, and we've got Surrey, Waverley and Farnham. I mean, I don't know whether all councils have got 2 or 3 different councils to pay council tax, but ours are pretty high. The service is pretty abysmal. There's so much waste along the lines of what you've just been saying. What I'd like to know from the panel is the amount of money that the government have provided in addition, in other words, the COVID fund, because I understand it's billions of pounds that have been distributed to councils, and I'd like to hear your experiences of where that money's gone, because that's in addition to everything else. That's the first one. The other one that isn't clear from my council is that, of course, we do need to provide a safety net for those vulnerable people and children, terribly important. But again, what people want to know in our residency is, what percentage of people are not paying their council tax? Because clearly, the people that aren't being paying are being subsidised, quite rightly, by people like us. But that doesn't come through. Now, I've heard some councils, and I think you alluded to it, Marion, there's a lot of people in Birmingham Council. I'd like to know where that money, where there's no transparency to that point. So every time the tax goes up, you hear more and more examples of people just actually not bothering to pay the council tax. I'm not even sure the council are chasing legitimate people that should be paying their council tax. I appreciate there's a lot of people who can't pay, who are vulnerable people, quite rightly need support from the council. These are the priorities, and taxpayers like us, we need to know where that money's coming from.
So any thoughts on where all the COVID money's gone, and things like the Welcome Back Fund as well springs to mind as well?
Councils, just something the government has done well and has helped councils with extra COVID costs. I deliver food parcels during the lockdowns to vulnerable people shielding, people couldn't go to work because they had, unfortunately, if you had an elderly relative but you were also the carer, but you were shielding. Someone had to look after. I was delivering food parcels to 99 and 100-year-olds that were very nice, but they needed to be looked after. So part of that was food. It was loss of income. Some of it to do with parking, cultural services. There was also leisure. I'm not sure Enfield took that up, but it's a wide variety. There was people, loss of council tax, because people suddenly went into where they need council tax subsidy due to lack of work. Obviously, it wasn't a direct grant, but a lot of work happened to give out the grants to businesses where sometimes you needed additional staff to just make up the demand on that. But I cannot say the government hasn't paid up on that. They've paid Enfield substantial money, I think over 42 million now. They used to be on TV saying they were hard up and the government hadn't done it. That is truly wrong. They have backed up councils on this, and it's something it can be proud of. In terms of our council tax rate of collection, it's above 95%. So which is good, but obviously that leaves another bit to do. One of the biggest failings, I say to me locally, is the council tax team and the planning team don't actually work hand in hand. So if someone decides to put a bungalow in their back garden and have tenants, they should be paying council tax for it. And if we do enforcement, they should be paying council tax on that. But there's not enough between building more housing and letting the council tax team know so they can get the council tax back on that.
Let's take some more questions. I think there was a gentleman we'll go to that gentleman at the back and then the gentleman in front of you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Would we go somewhere towards Councillor Jenkins' suggestion if you, instead of having a 2% cap, you allowed council tax to rise to 2% compounded from a baseline year? And that way, councils might feel more willing to freeze or lower even council tax, knowing that it's not hitting their possible revenues into the future, because there's a reluctance to not to put up council tax because you won't be able to catch up, if that makes sense. So you get some of that benefit. And thank you very much for having me in the question, despite me walking in late. Thank you so much.
Any thoughts on?
I mean, these suggestions like that are possible, but I think the fundamental point here is getting the linkage between those people that vote the council into power and those people that pay the tax to fund it. And at the moment, the 2% cap is flattering the Labour administration. And if they were allowed to let rip, and we'd be looking at 5, 6, 7% increases, I don't doubt, I think in due course they would be more likely to elect a Conservative administration. Let me tell you that we have, in our budget, obviously it's an opposition budget, we have frozen council tax every year that I've been responsible for it.
That's just another good point, and it's right about opposition budgets. I think are a really good point. When I first started in the job, I went up to Middlesbrough because there was going to be a hike in council tax, about 4% there, and I had a look through the opposition's proposals, and it would have meant that council tax could have gone down, and it wasn't cutting any essential services. It was all what I would describe as nonsense that shouldn't have had public taxpayers' money going on in the first place. So it can be done. Anyway, sorry, that gentleman in the grey suit, and then we'll come to this gentleman in the second row here.
Thank you. So I'm Deputy Leader of West Northamptonshire Council, and Harry, I'm sure you're aware of the record of our predecessor County Council, which was, if there's the opposite of a beacon, Northamptonshire County Council was that in local government. I think to answer the question on the screen, why does council tax only ever go up? I think the only other tax that I can think of that is levied in cash terms is the television licence. And so, when you've got a tax system that is levied in cash terms rather than as a percentage of income, so for example, if I employ an extra person in my business, if my business makes a bigger profit, the state benefits automatically because they tax a percentage of that revenue. If you stop increasing council tax, then you have compound effects because your revenue stops going up. You then lose any benefit of increasing council tax the year after. You're behind the curve in terms of revenue generation, which you need in order to provide the services. Yes, as Councillor Fifield says, you can increase revenues by building more houses, but then service pressures come along with that. There is waste in local government. There's huge waste. And so we've just started the budgeting process for the next financial year in West Northamptonshire. We've set a savings target of 5% in each service area. We're going through the process of reprocuring our highways contract, and we're doing everything possible to engineer out the waste in our system. There will always be waste, though, But I think the question that we should really be asking here is whether council tax is even an adequate method of funding local government these days. We've not had a proper funding review of local government in years. We've got a tax system that is 30 years out of date in terms of the property values that we're levying that tax on. And we've got a government that has no coherent long-term plan for how local government operates or is funded. So I think we're asking the wrong question in a lot of ways, and we need to have a proper look at how big local government needs to be and what we want local government to provide to people that we're serving.
Well, I can hardly recommend the single income tax by the Taxpayers Alliance that sets out a new funding model for local government. Let's have this gentleman here, and I think that's going to have to be the final question before we have to wrap up.
I just want to build on the last person's contribution. I actually do think that council tax is really an outdated tax. And what Councillor Marion suggested, it sounds a bit like the poll tax, and we know how that ended up. I think some form of local income tax is the way to go, so that it's more linked to people's ability to pay and not a house that they've got. In my council, which is Watford, I mean, I remember I stopped even looking at the council my budget because it's so depressing. But last time I looked at it, the chief executive was getting paid I think about $250,000. He was a failed guy from the London Development Agency. He was useless then. And he hasn't improved with age. And then on top of that, the council accounts haven't been certified. I pay £120 a year for my bin collection, which is £40 per bin, on top of a council tax, which I can't remember how much it is, but it's about £3,500. It's not cheap. And the only thing I do see is bin collection. Now that's gone to a bi-weekly one, so I see now fall for it. Can we also make some kind of recommendation so that council chief executives don't get paid a fortune? And as far as the pensions are concerned, is it not possible to get the pension on a direct defined benefit, contribution rather than defined benefit? Because rest of the private sector don't get this golden pension, so why do the councils? So.
Well said. Any just quick comments from the panellists before we have to wrap up?
Yeah.
Darren?
On that. Just to address a few of the points, I agree council tax is obviously out of date. I think, unfortunately, for all of us here, I think it's unlikely the government's going to be doing anything on it anytime soon. Spending reviews coming up, but yeah, I wouldn't imagine much is coming up in terms of council tax. And I think quite a lot of the points that we've made, a lot of the questions have been about waste and so on. And I think it's really good that we've managed to discuss a few of the examples that we've managed to find ourselves. But I think one of the points that I failed to mention in my actual opening speech that I think really is important for all of us in this room is actually I think we need even more transparency than we've currently got. I mean, as a policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance, I spend my life essentially sending FOI requests, as does Harry, to local authorities to try and figure out how they're spending our money. And there are certain councils, I will say West Northants is a good council, it does actually respond to them, but there are a number of councils that will refuse them no matter what, and they will do it on a consistent basis. And my fundamental view on this is that if a council, and you're more than allowed to be like this, is proud and happy and of what they're doing, then you should be able to put yourself up for scrutiny and be accountable for taxpayers and for everyone else in this room.
Well, there is a limit, though, is there not? If it exceeds £1,000, but yeah. There's always going to be a trade-off, though, isn't there, about getting that information? I would agree with that. Charles, I think you had a.
Yeah, I was just going to follow on from what being said. I think the best that we can do is keep on asking those difficult questions, and the work that the Taxpayers Alliance is really important about what they are doing to go and highlight waste and also speak to other councillors. So events like today are important, that you've got the opportunity to come away with a couple of ideas of might be worth trying that. I mean, we are a unitary council. We were created 12 years ago, and there was a lot of hoo-ha locally about it, but it was probably a blessing in disguise because it gave us a 2-year head start to the austerity, as everybody calls it, programme that came in, because necessity is the mother of invention, that when you can do shared services or joint services or just look at everything from scratch, it does give you the opportunity. And I'd also go and give a shout out that if you happen to have a member of Parliament who is Conservative, feel free to drop a line to them and ask them how much money does your local council get from central government? Because that information is available from the House of Commons Library, and that's a crucial bit of information every time Labour goes on about cuts from government. Well, what about the hundreds of millions that government's giving with the other hand? Give.
I was just going to say, I take note of your comments, sir, but thinking to Birmingham, we have a real problem with transparency. And the Conservative group is constantly battling to get information out and make it available in the public domain to those people who pay everybody's wages. Joanna mentioned the matter of SEND transport, which is taking special educational needs children to school. We've called an extraordinary council general meeting on this single subject next week because it's been an utter and total fiasco in Birmingham. So I think we have to accept the cost of transparency, because without it, the taxpayers would have so little visibility of what our dreadful council is up to in Birmingham.
Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time, but can I just do a quick straw poll? Who here is from a council where council tax has gone up this year? By a show of hands. Anyone from a council where it was frozen? Okay, went down? Yeah, unfortunately. Unfortunately not, there weren't many of those. Well, you know, we set out to ask the question, why does council tax always go up? I think we've sort of got a pretty good gist of why it does. And so now the onus is on you and the Taxpayers Alliance to fight wasteful spending, to look for ways that councils can be more efficient. And if that's something you'd like to help in that fight, please come and talk to me afterwards. Happy to exchange details and come and look at what's going on in your council. I'm sure Darwin will be happy to send more FOIs in the most cost-efficient manner possible. I will just quickly say, some councils are very good. You ask them for the information, it's there. Others are like, oh, we couldn't possibly do that. It's too difficult. It's written on some paper somewhere, you know. And so I think there's a big difference in councils about how that works. But if we could say a big thank you to our panelists, and also to everyone that's made the event run particularly well, including our wonderful Sarah Rainwater, who's over there, and all the people doing the teas and coffees. A big round of applause for them and our panelists.